Welcome to episode 7 of Behind the Algorithm, where we're joined by journalist Lindsay Dodgson, who boasts a career spanning nearly 10 years working across traditional news titles, B2B, science and technology, and business publications. Plus, author of the book, A Little Light, 20 Ways the Coronavirus Response Could Make the World Better. Lindsay, lovely to have you with us. Would you mind sharing a brief overview of your career to date?
Of course, yeah. I guess I could start with my first degree, which was in zoology, which has nothing to do with journalism. I didn't really know what I wanted to do at university, but I got into blogging and, reporting for student websites. And so I thought, how can I merge these two things together? And so I ended up doing a master's in science journalism at City University in London. And that's where it all clicked. And after that, which was a very intense year of my life, I got a job writing for these B2B publications about energy, mining, lots of interesting stuff like that, including, look how big this oil rig is, which was very fascinating. But, I just love writing. So I was like, this is, a dream job, whatever I'm writing about. And then about a year after that, I ended up getting a job at Business Insider, where I then was for about 9 years. And in that time, as you can imagine, I wrote about a lot of different stuff, ranging from workplace culture to influencers, to mental health and psychology, behavior, lots of interesting things. And now I am entering the freelance world, where I'll be doing a lot of the same kind of thing.
Thank you. Today, we're discussing journalism in a post-truth world, which, for the record, doesn't mean that truth has disappeared, but the truth now competes and often loses against content designed to trigger feelings, confirmation bias, and social belonging. So hopefully you can bring a lot of that experience, maybe some from the zoology work, into the fore of some of these questions. So I did a bit of research on your most recent articles on Business Insider, and they're all sort of investigative in nature, and in a lot of cases exploring how new sort of comms platforms like Facebook, like Twitter, and sort of augmented human behavior. So in your opinion, how do you think they've changed the news landscape?
Big question. I think, you're absolutely right that the news ecosystem has changed a lot, even in my kind of shortish career. I think on the positive side, it's really great and really interesting that people can, listen to, read ideas and stories from people that they really enjoy. And, it's easier than ever to kind of find your people in that respect. And, kind of seeing journalists as kind of influencers in themselves and, following along their work because you just really like what they do and you really believe in what they do and the kind of things that they're covering. I guess on the negative side, it's kind of harder than ever to kind of know whether there's like a rigorous fact checking process in, those kind of stories that are being covered. And there's a lot of due diligence that I think needs to be going on there, which doesn't necessarily always happen. So it's, I think ultimately that comes down to the responsibility of the individual, but that's a pretty hard sell, if I'm honest, isn't it? It's kind of a hard pill to swallow when you think like, well, people in the media should be doing that work for me. I should be able to trust that they're, telling the truth and all that kind of thing. But as we know, truth is a subjective word at the moment. Yeah. And, faith and trust in journalists is at an all-time low, it seems. So there's a lot of things, there's a lot of problems that we're up against. But yeah, definitely a very different news ecosystem to even 10 years ago, I would say, because the news can happen anywhere. It can happen on Twitter or X, as it's called now. It can happen on TikTok, and it's still happening in traditional media, all different kinds. And I think what people see as news in even like 5 years' time could look very different as well.
That's quite fascinating. So when you say 5 years' time, what do you think that difference will be?
I think it'll look even more fragmented. From kind of colleagues of mine and, seeing kind of mass layoffs in the media world and just seeing the kind of stories that traditional media covers now. And so many journalists are going independent now. There's lots of Substacks, there's Beehive, there's, some are just on YouTube and TikTok kind of reporting the news kind of independently and directly. I think it's likely that trend will continue. I think a lot more journalists will be thinking, what am I doing here in this company? Am I being squeezed in a direction that I don't necessarily agree with? Am I covering stories that I really believe in and, really want to tell? And I think it's just my opinion, but I think in, maybe 5 years' time, you'll see a lot more big names kind of doing their own thing, honestly, whether that'll be on newsletters or their own channels or, a YouTube channel or whatever. I think that's probably what it'll look like. I mean, I don't think traditional media is going anywhere right now, hopefully, but I think there'll probably be a bit of a reckoning in terms of like, oh, do we actually want to appreciate our top talent? Do we really actually want to invest more in them? And kind of not, I suppose, just use them as these kind of like hamster wheel churning, let's just churn out the quick stuff, get the clicks, that kind of thing. Maybe we should invest more into, the long reads and, the investigations and the things that people not necessarily want, but what they need, So I think maybe that will come first. It'll be a kind of wave of high powered or like, highly followed journalists kind of thinking, you know what, maybe I want to try the independent route for a while. I think that's probably what we'll see more.
When you see that as well, how do you think that sort of the transformation of the way in which we digest and consume news, how do you think that's also gone and transferred into today's corporate world and political world? What do you think I'd love to hear your opinion on what you think the impact has been around this transformation of the media.
Yeah, definitely. So it's kind of seen as a measure of success now in a way, isn't it?
Is it a measure of success, or is it, or is it where people think that this is what they need to do to be successful?
It's a necessity.
So is it it's now become part of being media savvy, being able to go out and tell a story is part of maybe what the political world and also the business and corporate world is all about now?
I think
especially
so.
at a senior leadership level.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's true. I think it's probably always been kind of this case in politics, but very much more so, I would say, in the corporate world.
We do, yes.
So I think you talk about sort of journalists going independent and such, because really people are turning up and listening to or reading content that has the personality of the journalist. I mean, love him or loathe him, Piers Morgan had a huge following on, I can't remember what channel he was on before they booted him off, and then he set up his own thing.
Wasn't it this morning?
Was it?
Yeah, was it this morning?
Booted off this morning.
Yeah, or Good Morning Britain or something like that.
The highest ratings they'd ever had, and then started his own show, I think. And now he's got a huge following. He's been incredibly successful, but you love him or loathe him, people come for his point of view. How has sort of traditional media news platforms been able to sort of adapt to this new ecosystem? Have they? Have they not adapted? Are they still like the music industry flogging CDs or chasing clicks? And is that partly why all of their talent is now going independent, because they can't keep up with the hype cycle, the news cycle of social media?
It's a good question. I think it's probably a bit of both. Yeah, with Piers Morgan, I think people are just like attracted to his audacity, aren't they? When somebody is kind of unapologetic about their views, whether you agree with it or not, you kind of just can't look away.
Yeah, that's right.
I think that's true.
Activation.
Yeah. Activation is, good currency. And I do think in the past few years, you've seen kind of journalism outlets kind of leaning into that kind of like news influencer. They're trying to mimic it, I guess. They'll try and boost their TikTok platforms, their Instagram reels. They'll have more journalists kind of forward facing, to the camera and, kind of trying to big up that kind of personality aspect. I do think there are some that are doing it quite well, but I do think it's probably could be done more. And I think you're right that probably there are some that aren't keeping up. And maybe it's just a trend, though. Who knows? Maybe people will get sick of the news influencer thing.
I missed that. On the screen, there we go.
And each person sitting either side of you going, okay.
You strategically folded broadsheet so you could, sit there on the.
Yeah.
Maybe showing my age there.
Yeah. I mean, I do see kind of a slight increase in these kind of like anchor positions, I guess you could call it, at publications. Kind of where somebody's voice is first. They call it a big voice piece, where it's like, not quite opinion, but it's like their opinion. Maybe that's the way it's going.
So are you saying that we're sort of going more towards opinion pieces in journalism rather than fact checks? Well, not so fact check, that's maybe too strong a word for it, where evidence is presented to support particularly what happened and actually telling the truth. So you're saying now it's more, so the other point about it as well is with the advent of social media, where you've got limited characters, you can't tell a story in limited characters, can you? A story has a before and after, it has all sorts of different influences on it. But when you've got such a short media attention and media span, does that mean that journalism's then sort of gone, okay, well, we need to compete with that?
Perhaps, yeah. I think that's probably happening in certain areas. I do still have faith in it, though, the long read. Yeah. I do still see it, occasionally. Maybe it's because I'm a journalist and it's kind of the people I speak to and the people who are in my circle. But, there'll often be, once a month or so, there'll be a piece that, really breaks through, and it'll be, 4,000 words or so. And everyone's read it and everyone's sharing it and everyone's thinking like, this was great. Whether it was like an investigation into a celebrity or if it was like a first person piece, whatever it was, it really does. I still see the love for it.
Yeah.
So I really hope that that's not kind of lost. I really hope that, I do understand this attention economy thing where, you do need to just get up short, quick hits, and you do need to kind of like get just the bullet points sometimes. I think there's room for both in this kind of evolving news ecosystem. And I think the outlets that are going to survive and kind of thrive the best are probably the ones that kind of can tackle both in a very thoughtful way. And I think, one journalist can do all of the above as well, quite honestly.
Do you think that's going to come from one organisation which can sort of contain that within, or do you think it's going to continue to see fragmentation? So as a consumer of news, and I'm with you, I love a long read. I like a well-researched, in-depth, evidence-based read. But do you think as a consumer of news, we're going to have to go out and find those different sources? Or do you think we'll be able to go, traditionally, we used to go to a news outlet and buy a newspaper, and that was our kind of source of daily news? Or do you think we're going to be ended up going to different sources and the whole system's going to change?
Different sources for different things is what my gut is saying. I mean, just kind of like using myself as a blueprint and how I kind of like consume the news. I have like 2 or 3 publications that I have a subscription to. The Cut,
that's interesting.
The Cut is one of them. Yeah. Rolling Stone, I kind of go in and out. I go in and out with it because occasionally there'll be something I really want to read on. And Fast Company I have as well. And those are just kind of publications that I've picked up over time, which I just really love reading.
And what it is about those, as a journalist, I'd love to hear what
I really
love about those.
You know what? It's different. It's different things. I think with Fast Company, it's kind of like, that's kind of very, very workplace, very like, Gen Z millennial, kind of a bit of mental health, AI reporting, how the workplace is changing, how business is changing. So that's kind of more of like, I guess, my work brain.
Okay,
that's like my work brain and the kind of like stories I was covering while I was at Business Insider. So that's kind of more like where I guess kind of get that sort of academic look at stuff. Whereas with The Cut and Rolling Stone as well, like it's more of like there's a really brilliant profile piece of a celebrity or a musician or something. Or in The Cut, it's more like, there's this really long read about this really bizarre niche topic that everyone's talking about. Or I've got a couple of examples. I mean, one was quite recently, which was this very long piece about just this neighbor dispute. It was this woman who, like this other woman had moved into her Airbnb on her property, and it just ended in chaos. Like this woman seemed like a total nightmare tenant, and it was just like picking apart the whole story. And I was like, you don't get that many places now. Like I love somebody that like saw this like dispute happening and thinking like, this is a story I can write 4,000 words about now. And it had me hooked the whole way. And it's like, they're really good at kind of, the journalists there, they can really find those kind of like really like niche, just things you just wouldn't think about and wouldn't get anywhere else.
Is that because it's relatable?
Is it
because I'm not suggesting your neighbor, your neighbor
yes, exact specific.
But what I mean is, it is talking about a subject which is we can all get on board with and we can all relate to. When we're talking about economics, and I love The Economist, that's one of my favourite publications, and I love it because I think it gives me facts, it gives me evidence, and I can actually take it forward and go, I feel educated and more aware after reading it. Whereas for a lot of people, reading about the macroeconomics of oil in certain countries probably isn't that interesting. Reading about neighbours' disputes, which is probably something more relatable they probably had, may well be. And do you think it's partly that?
Possibly. I think it's like different strokes for different folks, as they say, don't they? It's kind of like, I think that's probably one of the great things about this kind of, I keep saying fragmented. Fragmented seems like kind of a negative word, but I don't think it is necessarily. It's just kind of, pieces of the pie are just kind of broken up a bit more now. And, for me, it is, I guess, I really like the relatability. I really like reading about people like me or people who aren't like me at all. I love reading about human behavior. That's always fascinated me, and the psychology of stuff, and, just how different people can be. I think that's what I've always loved about journalism and interviewing people. So I think that's probably what attracts me to those kind of stories. somebody more economically minded, would probably love to read about, how China is becoming or India is becoming the next superpower and things like that. To answer your original question is, my kind of news diet, if you want to call it that, is, I've got those publications. I also have a lot of newsletters that I subscribe to, and they're on a vast array of stuff. And, I also use TikTok a lot, and a lot of that is kind of news as well. So it's, I think people are increasingly just picking bits and pieces and learning more about what they want from the news, and kind of they can, I guess, curate it to their own tastes, I guess.
So getting back to some of the questions that we've got, sentiment and sensationalism drives a lot of the news. It drives a lot of our attention. You talking about your sort of neighbor, that story about the neighbor who's clearly having an issue, was an attention grabbing. So that kind of attention grabbing headline, it not only drives discourse across society, but also across the political sphere, but also within the corporate sphere as well. When we think of how, because obviously working for Business Insider, you wrote a lot about corporates, right?
Reasonable amount.
Yeah, you wrote a lot about business. How has the way that social media operates, or the way sensationalist headlines kind of pique our interest, transferred into the corporate world? And I'm thinking about the sort of sensationalist headline grabbing Theranos kind of things, or Fire Festival, where everyone looks like, oh, it looks amazing, it looks fantastic, I'll put some money into it, or I'll go to it. How has social media sort of upended, and how has that sort of attention economy ecosystem upended how the corporate world operates?
That's interesting. You've made that comparison. I think that's really interesting. Like, with Fire Festival, it was kind of people were following it along in real time. And maybe part of that was like, kind of seeing, like, I've seen how, a clickbait headline can kind of garner X amount of dollars or whatever.
Yeah.
Maybe I can turn that into a festival and kind of have a clickbait festival.
You did twice.
Yeah, he's been doing it right now.
I think he's failed the second time.
Right. Yeah, I think I saw some videos where it was looking a bit
he had
depressing.
a second crack at it, and investors still gave him money. But the sentiment behind him was positive, because they thought he can't do it again, but clearly he can.
But they were also kind of like being fueled by the documentary and by that kind of that notoriety, weren't they?
Yeah.
Can I just ask though, is that a question of, have we what we categorize as news, has that scope increased? So when you mention something like that, I think about that as marketing. But maybe I think about that from with a business hat on. I'm thinking, what you're talking about there is promotion, marketing, PR, everything else like that. Is it because we've increased the scope of what is news?
Probably, yeah.
And maybe therefore it becomes a little bit harder and a little more abstract, because all of a sudden the surface area of what is categorized as news is now so much larger than what it used to be.
Yeah.
Me tweeting about my cat, well, I have a cat, but I've had a cat, I tweet about a cat. But does that categorize as news?
You tweeting about your cat. I'm not sure if that would reach the bar of news, but I do get what you're saying, because, everyone is kind of being filmed now so much more often than they used to be. Things are being live streamed, people are live tweeting, live blogging. I think you're right that what sometimes would have maybe not reached that bar because maybe just like not enough people knew about it. Now millions of people can follow in real time, and kind of fuel that fire as well. Like, forgive the pun with Fire Festival, but before the social media boom, would Fire Festival have even happened, or even been a news story? I don't know. I think you're right that it's probably more things are news now, just because there are more eyes on so many more situations.
Well, I think the point I was trying to raise is that because of the way that news operates, and because of our sort of love for sort of the sensationalist headlines, we can get drawn into what's the wildest claim you've ever heard about a product's company's capabilities in line with a Theranos or something, like, given that you've written about a lot of business.
Yeah, I mean,
businesses.
I think every journalist really wants to have their own Theranos. Every journalist wants their bad blood, I think that's like one of the biggest stories of the last 10 years. That was just wild. And Fire Festival is probably up there too. I mean, I think my examples are definitely small in comparison. I think, those are the kind of stories that come once a decade or so. One that's kind of stands out to me was, do you remember like the NFT thing a few years ago?
Yeah.
What happened to that, by the way?
There's some people sitting here, some lovely digital artwork somewhere.
I really feel like that was just like, whoa, oh wait, it's gone off a cliff. Did they really?
Very cool. People made a lot of money in a very short space.
Very short space of time. What-
Some
Trump-
people did.
And Trump made sort of blockchain fraud legal. They're not going after anyone.
Interesting.
So your Logan Pauls and the
It
like.
was like the pump and dump stuff.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The Logan Pauls, who was that woman? Hopped her. She's not being done either. I could be wrong. Actually, I could be wrong. But they're not seeing it as a criminal case. I don't know. I'll have to do the research on that.
Interesting.
But yeah, so
NFTs.
NFTs. Sorry.
I just remember like a couple of years ago when this whole like boom was happening. There was there were so many NFT projects, and they were all kind of like, you know, harking on about how amazing they were, why they were different, and why they were the one that was, you know, you should buy from. But one of them was it was marketed as this all-female company, all-female founded. You know, it's all about women, like all our NFT cartoons are, you know, all these cool, powerful women. It's all about female, you know, empowerment and all this kind of thing. And then somebody figured out that the founding team was all men. And they got in a lot of trouble, and I think their value tanked. And there was kind of like a rehabilitation scheme, I suppose, to kind of, you know, they kind of gave it back to the women who are in the community, and it kind of like ended on a positive note. But I thought that was just quite funny.
Was it an AI female board, or was it fellas in
Yeah,
wigs?
I think it was a. Now that rings a bell. I think it was.
Really?
I think it was like all men, and like they just made up women. And somebody realized, like, who are these people? These people don't exist anywhere on the internet. And you think somebody who was, you know, invested in an NFT company would have some kind of digital footprint. And yeah, they were just totally made up.
It's amazing the extremes people will go to, and also more importantly, what they think they can get away with nowadays. But with that links to another point, which is you talked about the rehabilitation. This now is one of the words you used. Do you think it's easier for organisations now to get away with promoting these sort of alternative truths, and also maybe sometimes telling downright lies, and then coming back for a second bite?
It is an interesting question. Like, I do myself find that I'll be outraged by something, you know, whether it's, you know, founder lying, or if it's massive fraud, or if it's, you know, sexual harassment, or whatever it is, something I find like very distasteful and very offensive. And then 3 months later, I'll have forgotten about it. And I think that's kind of like, culturally, we seem to be in this kind of like, because there's so much bad news and bad stuff happening, we're almost kind of like, our brains can't really deal with it.
Desensitized to
We're
it.
kind of desensitized to it. But, you know, that doesn't mean we feel anything. For me, anyway, I still feel outraged at the time. But then, like, I just don't hang on to it necessarily, because, like, I mean, if I'm reminded of it, sure, then I will, you know, think about it again. But it is very easy for people to just kind of forget and move on, I think, which, you know, I guess does make it easier for kind of people to have a rebrand, or a company to have a rebrand, if they kind of come back and say, like, you know, I think of the YouTuber apology video, which always happens, you know, like 3 months after they've been cancelled. You know, and immediately people are like, shut up, they go away, and then they do for like a year, and then they come back and they just don't mention it again. And
He's
but
all right.
the people don't even mention
He's
it.
learned his
Their
lesson.
comments are filled with, "I missed you."
Yeah.
But is that because we're becoming a more caring society?
That's
I know it sounds
that's
kind of
very optimistic.
I am optimistic. You know, I feel we have to be optimistic. But is it because ultimately we go around, we educate, we teach, and we turn around and say, okay, when people make mistakes, let's forgive them. And obviously there's some mistakes which are unforgivable. There's other mistakes where it is a genuine mistake and we should sort of move on.
Yeah,
Do you think it's part of us becoming a kinder society?
that's a nice outlook.
Or
I
does that
mean,
not hit with your heart, sort of hard
I don't
journalism
know.
head?
You know, I do kind of agree with you, because there was a big period of cancel culture, wasn't there? What was like 5-ish years ago. People were being kind of taken down, and there were a lot of people that thought it went a bit far. That people thought that, you know, people were being cancelled, losing followers for kind of very minor indiscretions. I think of kind of famous example of the YouTuber James Charles, who was kind of taken down by his mentor Tati Westbrook. I think at the time it was something to do with the fact that he didn't advertise her hair gummies, and he lost like 3 million followers. And it was kind of like gamified. You know, people were watching this live on what's it called? I've forgotten the name of it.
Twitch.
Blade.
Social Blade.
It was it's like this. It used to have kind of, you could be able to watch in real time people's follow accounts.
Oh,
And
right.
so
Okay.
people were
So it's
watching
an
it
analytics
along.
tool.
Yeah.
Yeah, an
Okay,
analytics
fine.
tool. And so they've got rid of this. I think in hindsight, they thought it was a bit of toxic. So they got rid of like the live version of it. But yeah, that's just like one example. And I think that happened a lot for quite a while. And then then like this kind of anti-cancel culture situation sort of started happening. So I think like perhaps people are a bit more forgiving and a bit more discerning about like, what is cancelable and what isn't, because it did feel like for a time, all wrongs were kind of tarnished with the same brush, all wrongs were kind of considered just as bad as each other, whether that was, Russell Brand or whether that was someone like James Charles, it was kind of like they were kind of, it was
All lumped in the same basket.
exactly. And it does feel like maybe there's a bit of a shift to be like, okay, well, let's like be a bit more discerning here. Let's think about this a bit more. Yes, you can be pissed off with someone, but maybe don't like call for them to lose their, entire livelihoods just because they've made one error. So I think there's something in that.
That's interesting, because I think of something at the moment which is going on, which is obviously the very famous viral clip this year, which was the Chris Martin's Coldplay concert. And I've noticed I don't know if you've been reading the news over the last few days, it may actually coincide exactly with the timelines you've mentioned, because I'm not sure when that concert and that incident was. But one of the individuals which was caught up in that incident has now been in all of the major sort of UK publications like
Really?
the Telegraph, the Times, doing a piece on what the impact has been on their life, and basically going through that rehabilitation of trying to get back out there and tell that story again, and give their perspective on it, and basically reintegrate themselves into normal life.
That's fascinating. Yeah, that's really interesting. I wondered whether that would happen, honestly, when I think it was over summer when the Coldplay concert was. And I wondered whether they would end up doing an interview.
Well, they have.
And they have.
Yes. Yes. I think it was in the Times or the Telegraph within the last couple of days. So it's definitely there. But also, do you think that now, because of that whole being able to reintegrate yourself, rehabilitate yourself, do you think, are we just living in a society now where it's just okay to lie? And it's okay to put lies out there? I mean, one of the things which we were talking about earlier was the lack of belief in business leaders and governments, and the lack of trust in them. And that's, over the last 4 years, across business, across governments, across journalism, the actual lack of trust in those as sort of not to tell the truth, or the lack of basically saying that they don't believe they're telling the truth, has gone up, which surprises me.
Yeah. Is it okay to lie? I mean, I hope not.
Yeah.
I hope not. I mean, as a journalist, I think, journalists make mistakes, and you hope that when they do that, that just means a correction. It means, you just correct your mistake, you apologize if you need to. When it comes to, bending the truth and lying, God, it's so hard because, I don't trust every publication, if I'm honest. And you have to use your judgment in terms of like, okay, well, especially now, it feels like there's deep pockets behind certain, news outlets now. And you do have to wonder like how much that's filtering in, and those views are filtering in, whoever owns us, is that, the point of view that we have as a news outlet. I think I don't know if that is lying necessarily, but it is, the truth is quite subjective, isn't it?
Yeah. And what do you think about the sort of the dominance of subjective realities based on the fact we had a conversation with Stephanie Antonian about the future of social media, and obviously it plays a massive part on the news ecosystem at the moment because it's where a lot of people get their content from. We're seeing a fragmentation of social media platforms to where they'll become more decentralized over time. So do you see, are you worried about objective truth? Are you worried about people getting more embedded in their own filter bubbles?
Yes, I am. It definitely worries me, for obvious reasons. But in a way, I'm also kind of optimistic because
You think they'll self-regulate?
potentially,
Well, the social media platforms, are you saying, will self-regulate?
no, as in like the people.
People's.
Yeah, because I think I have noticed a bit more of like this. I don't know if you'd call it like accountability, but it's kind of like people are doing a bit more research, I would
Yeah.
say. And there's this kind of call out culture for people who are spreading things that are incorrect. That's kind of become a little cancellation in itself. If there was an example fairly recently, I think it was like late last year, and there was this creator on TikTok who was really skyrocketing in popularity because he essentially he's kind of doing like deep dives on various people and situations and kind of giving what was perceived as this kind of like objective timeline of events. But people started questioning him, and it turned out that he was kind of just making stuff up, and kind of like his research wasn't particularly well considered. It was, they were getting things wrong, and it seemed like he was being, his kind of biases were showing as well. After this kind of like major success, people were like, hang on a minute, where did you get that from? What's your source for this? And people were like very, they really picked up on it. And so like situations like that made me think, okay, so people are skeptical, which I think is healthy. And, I think we've all been burned by watching a TikTok video, seeing an Instagram post, reading an article even, and just taking it at face value. And then like later, or maybe if it's just somebody telling you something and then you later kind of say it, you kind of share it with someone, and someone's like, that's not true. We've all been burned by that, haven't we? And I think maybe that means that we're becoming a bit more careful. I hope so.
Now that's an optimistic view, because when you look at some of the more sort of extreme communities out there, they can be easily sort of manipulated by the right, and I say by the right for their audience, by the right message or the right image, which can often be faked or used to manipulate discourse. If you look at the far right, for example, show them a picture of an immigrant doing something wrong and they're all up in arms, and it could not be correct at all. It could be from incorrect timeline, incorrect image, factually inaccurate, but because it's so close to their belief system, they will sort of jump on the bandwagon for it. Do you think there's a difference between the kinds of reporting or the kinds of story that it is?
It is a tricky one, and I do agree with you that there are pockets that if you are deep in a conspiracy theory, if you are deep in the kind of like a very bubbled off world which does have these very extreme views, it's so hard to break out of.
Which anything to go against your point of view is
it's just more evidence.
It's more evidence of it being true.
Absolutely. It's more
evidence only needs to be in one piece. That's the trouble with quite often. Instead of looking at 100 pieces, they take one piece and go, that's evidence. And so they ignore all the other 99 pieces. So actually, the truth is very different. But it's very subjective.
It's very subjective, and they'll believe this one, but like these 100 ones, that's lies. That's propaganda. That's George Soros or whatever it is now that they think is funding everything. Yes, they just see it as more evidence that they're right. Unfortunately,
isn't George Soros funding everything?
He can fund this podcast if he likes to.
You hear that?
Come on, George, going to show me. Say whatever you want.
We won't. We won't.
I mean, and we are living in this kind of like the world of deep fakes now, and that does scare me. Especially as a journalist, I think about like how I see evidence, and whether that's a video, a voice note, a picture, text messages, shown. How much of that is going to be able to be faked very convincingly in the very near future? Probably quite a lot. So it's going to be harder than ever to find that truth and kind of really believe yourself that you've got the evidence, and so it does scare me, and it would make that battle even more difficult. So I'm both optimistic and pessimistic. I think they're probably two separate issues, honestly. I mean, the kind of general populace that isn't in these extreme bubbles is probably easier to tackle in a way. And I do see some movement there. The people are being, more thoughtful, asking for more sources. And that area makes me more optimistic, I think. But I think, you're right that with extremism, I don't see that kind of turning around anytime soon.
I suppose it leads to a fascinating question, or a follow-up point is, with that, does that mean I've got a statistic here, and it says that Meta and Google, Meta accounts for 39% of the sources for online news, Google 34%, in the UK, that is. And that's where people go to. Now, within that, that's obviously taking multiple different sources and ignoring a lot of other sources of news. So it is the responsibility to actually turn around to the algorithm. So the news may actually still be out there. I mean, you're talking about these bubbles where people are just hearing content which is reinforcing certain key beliefs and so forth. Because of the 1,000 news stories which may be available, the algorithm is saying, okay, we're going to give you these 10 because they align with what you spent the most time looking at. Therefore, the most adverts we can generate and therefore monetize. Or is it actually we need to, maybe the news hasn't changed, but it's just the way in which the algorithms which feed that news to us have changed. And maybe that's where we need to start pushing back on. You spoke just now about using people to go, not using people, but people going out there to actually source their own different news. Or maybe we need to turn around and say, actually, those ones which act as filters and aggregators, maybe we need to put an onus on them to act responsibly.
I think, I agree, especially with, like kind of AI generators now, people aren't even clicking through to them. What Google is showing them, and it's just like an AI summary, isn't it, a lot of the time? And so that's why traffic is just, completely nosedive. I do agree that it is a responsibility of the platform, but I don't believe it will ever happen. I don't believe there will ever be the Googles of this world, the Metas of this world, and the people behind them. I don't believe they really care enough to put that in front of their money.
They're not incentivized to care.
No.
It's not within their interest to care. They want to serve you what they know you want to read because that's what they know will drive clicks.
Yeah.
They're not going to change that behavior because their advertising model will plummet.
And nobody's putting the pressure on them. Nobody's really.
Nobody can. They're too big.
Too big, and nobody would, even if in Congress they kind of talk about it, that doesn't mean anything. Really.
They fine them, and it's cost of doing business.
Yeah, exactly.
So as a journalist, how does that make you feel? Because this is
great.
No, but
It makes me feel great. I think this is why I talk about the media ecosystem as it is, and why it doesn't necessarily depress me. I just always say to people, I just really encourage people to read what you love and find the news, find the stories, find the journalists you like, and find the creators you like, and be discerning, skeptical when you need to be, but kind of just get a wide range of information. I think that's your best. I think that's, as a population, that's the best weapon against that kind of movement. That's the best weapon against, kind of falling down these rabbit holes and kind of getting extremized. That's not a word. Extremized. Yeah. I think just kind of knowledge is power, quite honestly. I know that's a cliche. Yeah, I think it just means you don't necessarily know who to trust, and I really appreciate that. I do get that. And I think, I think you just need to put in a bit of work into finding out who it is you do trust. And, as I said, be skeptical when you need to be.
And when it comes to trust, have you ever been compromised?
How so?
Have you been asked to write a story for anyone and they've given you a specific agenda to align to? Whether it's about sort of a competitor business or whether it's about sort of any sort of PR management stuff?
Yeah,
there's a scandal and you're asked to write a story to...
Yeah, I think that happens to me in lots and lots of small ways. I think that's just kind of PR and crisis comms in general. When you have a source, whether it's about, I don't know, buy now, pay later apps, kind of, I think largely people agree that they're probably not great for, people with spending issues and,
were you at Business Insider when the whole Wonga debacle kind of happened?
Oh, no, I wasn't actually. That was just before.
I was working in the industry when that happened.
Were you?
So I won't go down that rabbit hole. Please buy now, pay later.
It is kind of this kind of just like a new age version of it, isn't it? The kind of,
And they'll target people with very bad credit scores.
Right.
Who are indebted, who probably also use gambling apps.
Yep. Yeah. And you can even pay for Deliveroo now with Klarna.
Really?
I think you can pay in bars with Afterpay and stuff like you.
Can you?
I think so. At least in America
nuts.
you can.
It's a huge business.
It's massive.
I think, Klarna, isn't it? Australian, I think.
I'm not entirely sure.
Yeah, but there's loads of them now.
So you were compromised by...
No, I wasn't compromised. This is just one example. This happens all the time when you're writing a story, which is not necessarily entirely positive, and you'll, the PR person on whatever company it is will kind of push you on it and kind of be they'll want to see all of your, source material, which you obviously can't give them. You have to just be look, this is what I've got, this is what my sources are saying, and they'll be well, they'll push back against it and be well, we can't comment unless we see, all the evidence, unless we know exactly who you're talking to, all this kind of stuff. And it's I can't do that. Or, you're talking about an influencer who maybe has got into trouble for some reason. Maybe they had they put on an event and it was not what it was supposed to be, or, they did a pump and dump scheme or whatever it was. There'll always be a counter narrative. Is your job as a journalist to kind of include what is relevant and what is, a fair enough, answer to your questions, and what is, just a downright lie or bending of the truth. So I never had a situation where I was never pressured internally, for example, to like write something.
There was never any sort of smoky bars where you were
No,
met by a guy in a Mac in a trilby with a suitcase of
no,
money saying, if you write about so and so in a positive light,
no,
there's
never had
more.
that. Never had that. No, luckily, I've never been faced with that kind of situation. It'd be interesting though. I mean, I would obviously not take the money, but it would be interesting to be propositioned. You know,
Well, it'd be interesting to find a smoky bar. If smoking's banned and all, you'd have to have someone following with a smoke machine just to.
Yeah.
I mean, I was having a little sort of Dick Tracy moment in my head.
Yeah, you got it really
see-
pictured out.
I literally could see it.
Yeah. So you know what you're going to do at next fancy dress party.
Dick Tracy. For those who don't know, Dick Tracy is look him up.
I thought you were actually going to explain there, and you're just
I
like,
was not.
No, it's on you. That's your research to do. We're talking about doing your own research. There we go.
So, Lindsay, in your opinion, as a journalist, how can we move from a post-truth world to a pro-truth world?
I love it. I love that. I love that term. I think honestly, a lot of the things we've spoken about already today, kind of that personal responsibility to be quite considerate about where your information is coming from, and reading, if you're really interested in the subject, getting it from a lot of different sources, not just one point of view. I think as journalists we have a big responsibility there too. Everyone has a right to tell their story, but journalists have a responsibility to kind of interrogate that story and not be worried about who you might piss off in the process, because the truth should be like the top priority with telling a story as a journalist. I also think truth. I mean, I don't know if this is a well thought out thought, but truth maybe is kind of seen as a weapon in a way at the moment. I feel, especially with this kind of like alternative facts kind of situation that we've found ourselves in over the last 10 or so years. Almost like truth needs a rebrand, to be kind of something that is interrogated, and it takes a while to kind of get to the bottom of what the truth is, but versus kind of just seeing it on the surface level or using it for an agenda. It should be completely outside the realms of opinions and money and all this kind of stuff.
I love it that truth needs a rebrand. Truth 2.0, sexier than ever.
I think I want 3.0 with truth.
I do, yeah, more than that maybe. Do you know what I mean though? It's kind of like what is true.
Truth isn't cool.
It's not cool, and it can be bent, and it's I don't think people
But why
necessarily.
isn't it cool?
It's
Why is
good.
truth not
We need to
cool?
bring it back,
Truth is cool. Yeah.
especially when it's not like it's not being influenced by anything. It literally just is the truth. I think that's kind of been lost along the way, and I think kind of it would be cool to kind of get that back and be like, look, this isn't. This story isn't, it's got no pressures on it. I'm not, no one's breathing down my neck here. It's literally just, it is what it is kind of thing. I think that would be quite refreshing.
And how do we empower journalists to not lose their nerve and to follow truth?
Yeah, I mean, that is difficult. And at least from my experience and experiences of my colleagues, it does feel kind of harder than ever to follow that trail to truth, especially when somebody with deep pockets might be not very happy about it, and that can be something quite minor, or it could be something like quite major. It can be sexual harassment, or it could be fraud, or it could be something criminal. And it does feel like we're in this kind of crossroads in journalism where there's media companies are not in a great space financially, and you just need to look at all the layoffs that have been happening, and this kind of bending towards clickbait over the news that should be told. So I think for staff journalists particularly, it's very difficult to kind of sometimes they're told not to chase stuff because it won't reach the line of they can have all of the evidence, but it's not worth the lawsuit.
Yeah.
Which kind of goes against what journalism should be.
And is that applicable globally, or
I would say so.
is it dominant in different cultures? Or?
Definitely US, increasingly UK as well, I would say. But
Yeah, Trump will sue you.
So you're saying
Elon will sue you,
increasingly in the UK as well? So
I think so, yeah.
Even in your time in journalism, or have you seen a latter part?
I think people are more litigious, and companies and media companies are much more wary of that. If they see any kind of vulnerability in a story, no matter how important it is, it'll just get axed a lot of the time. There are definitely still brave publications for sure. I don't think this is every publication, but they're the minority, I would say, at least from what I've seen. You just need to look at the kind of stories that are being told right now. It used to be that it didn't really matter what publication it was, what figure it was, like big or small. If something was being done wrong, if something was illegal, if something was problematic, it would be reported. But that seems to, it's harder than ever to kind of reach that bar. As journalists, I think there's a lot of people going through like an internal battle to kind of, keep on that line of truth, but also keep their jobs. So what can they do? I guess it's a tough question to answer. My gut feeling is that a lot of people will be thinking, okay, well, what's more important to me? Is it, steady income and having a job, or is it, kind of
integrity,
living your values.
Living your values.
Yeah, what's your priority? And I think both are valid. I don't think one is necessarily, I wouldn't think less of you to choose the financial
But
route.
if you've got kids to feed, you're going to go for the former rather than the latter.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And you got a mortgage, it's tricky. But, I think if enough people do find that they are in the position that they can go down the integrity route, I'm not saying there's no integrity down this route, but, it's definitely something people will be weighing up. And I think that's probably the answer is, everything we've talked about with the ecosystem as it is, and, kind of people trusting individuals rather than necessarily outlets. I guess if you have the ability to lean into that, lean into your integrity, I would hope you would do it.
So do you think it's sort of moving to that pro-truth world? Do you think it's a whole society effort? So it's the media and journalists need to make their part.
Yeah.
Maybe at a government level, we need to start having more integrity in the government, and also maybe even at an illegal level, journalists should be have greater protection. We don't necessarily, I don't believe, have the same level of protection for journalism as over here.
The onus of, truth is different here. So if somebody sues you for defamation in the US, it's on the person who the claims are being made about to prove that they're not true. Whereas here, it's much harder. It's much easier, to kind of be sued for defamation because the onus of truth is on the journalist to prove that it is true. So but interestingly, Americans being Americans, which a lot to sue anyway, they don't have much chance.
But we also love Americans too.
Yeah, I love Americans.
And that brings us to the end of the podcast.
What a note to end on.
Is there anything you'd like to leave our audience with?
Honestly, I think then the pearl of wisdom from what we've been talking about, I think, is to be cast a wide net when you're looking at information. Be curious and be, interested in a wide range of stuff. I think, like I said, dig into topics that you're really interested in as much as you can. Watch YouTube, watch influencers, read the New York Times, read the BBC, watch the news on the TV. Get it from everywhere. Read books, subscribe to newsletters, do it all. I think as a society, yes, I think the responsibility is on the individual, it's on media outlets, it's on journalists, it's on politics, it's on everything. I think whatever you can do to kind of do your own little part in that kind of becoming more pro-truth, I think you should do. And I hope you do. I hope you do kind of seek out information wherever you can.
Well, Lindsay, thanks very much for joining us. And everybody subscribe and listen for more. Thank you so much. Cheers. Bye-bye.